Throughout history, there have been thinkers who dared to challenge the norms, question the unquestionable, and seek truths hidden beneath the surface of everyday life. These individuals were not just philosophers, they were pioneers of thought, rebels of their time, and torchbearers of wisdom. Their stories have transcended centuries, offering us glimpses into the profound depths of human existence, the complexities of truth, and the courage it takes to live authentically. In this journey, we will explore 10 remarkable tales that reveal the essence of their philosophies. These stories are not merely accounts of their lives or their ideas, but lessons etched in time, each one a beacon guiding us to reflect on our values, our perceptions, and the way we engage with the world around us. From Diogenes' quest for honesty to Nietzsche's challenge of eternal recurrence, each narrative invites us to pause, ponder, and perhaps see the world in a new light. Whether they make us question the nature of truth, the relativity of reality, or the simplicity of happiness, these stories offer timeless wisdom that speaks to the core of our human experience. So sit back and allow yourself to be transported to ancient marketplaces, royal courts, and the inner sanctums of philosophical thought. Let these tales unfold, sparking curiosity and contemplation as we delve into the lives and lessons of some of history's greatest minds. 1. Diogenes and the Lantern. Diogenes, the Cynic philosopher, was known for his ascetic lifestyle and disdain for societal conventions. One day, he walked through the bustling marketplace of Athens, holding a lit lantern in broad daylight. The townsfolk, puzzled by this odd behavior, gathered around him, curious to know what he was up to. As they questioned him, Diogenes proclaimed loudly, "I am looking for an honest man." The people laughed at his absurdity, but Diogenes was serious. His act was a powerful critique of the society he lived in. He believed that most people were hypocrites, pretending to be virtuous while leading lives of deceit and selfishness. The lantern, which typically helped people see in the dark, was a symbol of clarity and truth. Diogenes was suggesting that even in the bright light of day, it was nearly impossible to find a person who was truly honest and genuine. Through this act, Diogenes was not only challenging the people of Athens, but also urging them to reflect on their own lives. He questioned the values and morals of society, highlighting the importance of sincerity and integrity. The story of Diogenes and the Lantern invites us to examine our own actions and to seek authenticity in ourselves and others. It serves as a reminder that honesty is a rare virtue, and that true enlightenment comes from seeing beyond the superficial appearances of society. 2. Archimedes and the Golden Crown. Archimedes, the great mathematician and inventor of ancient Greece, was once approached by King Hiero II of Syracuse with a perplexing problem. The king had commissioned a golden crown to be made as an offering to the gods, but he suspected that the goldsmith might have deceived him by mixing the gold with silver and keeping some of the gold for himself. However, there was no way to prove this without damaging the crown, and King Hiero sought Archimedes' help. Archimedes pondered over this dilemma for days, struggling to find a solution. One day, as he was taking a bath, he noticed how the water level rose as he immersed himself in the tub. It suddenly struck him that the volume of water displaced was equal to the volume of his body submerged in the water. Excited by this discovery, he realized he had found a way to determine the density of the crown without harming it. Without even taking the time to dress, Archimedes leaped out of the bath and ran through the streets of Syracuse, shouting, "Eureka! Eureka!" which means, "I have found it!" He quickly went to the king and explained his method. Archimedes would weigh the crown and then immerse it in water to measure the volume of water it displaced. By comparing the crown's weight to the volume of water displaced, he could calculate its density. If the density was less than that of pure gold, it would indicate that the crown had been mixed with a less dense metal, like silver. The test was performed, and it revealed that the goldsmith had indeed mixed silver with the gold, thus confirming King Hiero's suspicions. Archimedes' clever application of the principle of displacement not only solved the king's problem, but also laid the foundation for what we now know as the science of hydrostatics. This story of Archimedes teaches us about the power of observation and creativity in problem-solving. It shows how a moment of insight, born from a simple everyday experience, can lead to groundbreaking discoveries. It also reminds us that sometimes the answers we seek are right in front of us, waiting to be uncovered through careful thought and observation. 3. Kant and Enlightenment. Immanuel Kant, one of the most influential philosophers of the Enlightenment, was deeply concerned with the question of what it means to be truly enlightened. He argued that enlightenment was man's emergence from his self-imposed immaturity. By immaturity, he meant the inability to use one's own understanding without guidance from another. For Kant, enlightenment was not simply about acquiring knowledge, but about having the courage to think for oneself. In his famous essay, What is Enlightenment?, Kant declared that the motto of enlightenment is sapere aude, or dare to know. He believed that most people were content to remain in a state of intellectual dependence, relying on others to do the thinking for them. They were afraid to use their own reason, either because they were lazy or because they feared the consequences of challenging established norms and authorities. Kant argued that the greatest obstacle to enlightenment was not the lack of knowledge, but the lack of resolve. He criticized both the institutions that kept people in a state of dependence and the individuals who willingly accepted this state. He urged people to break free from the chains of dogma and to use their reason as a guide to understanding the world. For Kant, enlightenment was an ongoing process, a commitment to critical thinking and the pursuit of truth. This story of Kant's philosophy teaches us the importance of intellectual freedom and the courage to think independently. It challenges us to question authority and to seek our own understanding of the world. It reminds us that true enlightenment is not about passive acceptance, but about active engagement with ideas and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Number 4. Socrates and the written word. Socrates, the classical Greek philosopher, is often remembered for his method of questioning and dialogue. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Socrates never wrote down his teachings. He believed that writing was a poor substitute for the living, dynamic process of dialogue. According to Socrates, true knowledge was not something that could be captured in words on a page, but something that had to be experienced through direct, personal engagement. One day, his students urged him to record his ideas for future generations. Socrates replied with a story. There was once a king who received a beautiful, ornate statue from a sculptor. The king admired it greatly and placed it in a prominent place in his palace. However, whenever he wanted to appreciate its beauty, he had to look at it from different angles and distances. He realized that no matter how he viewed it, the statue could never convey the full presence of the sculptor's art. Socrates explained that written words were like the statue, static, unchanging, and unable to respond to questions or adapt to the reader's understanding. He believed that knowledge was something living, something that could only be truly understood through an active process of questioning, dialogue, and reflection. Written words, he argued, were silent. They could not answer back or clarify themselves. They gave the illusion of knowledge, but lacked the depth and flexibility of real understanding. Socrates' story reminds us of the importance of engaging directly with ideas and with others in the pursuit of truth. It challenges the notion that knowledge can be passively acquired through reading alone, and emphasizes the value of dialogue, critical thinking, and personal reflection. In an age where information is readily available at our fingertips, this story serves as a powerful reminder that true wisdom comes not from the mere accumulation of facts, but from the active, thoughtful engagement with those facts. 5. Nietzsche and eternal recurrence. Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher, introduced a provocative idea known as eternal recurrence. He asked his readers to imagine a scenario in which a demon appears before them and says that every moment of their life, every joy, every sorrow, every thought, and every action will be repeated infinitely, exactly as it has occurred, without change, forever. How would they respond to such a proclamation? For many, this idea is terrifying. The thought of reliving every mistake, every regret, and every moment of suffering for eternity is unbearable. But Nietzsche used this thought experiment to challenge his readers to reflect on how they live their lives. He believed that if one could accept the idea of eternal recurrence, If one could embrace every moment of their existence without wishing for anything to be different, then they would have truly affirmed life in its entirety. Nietzsche's story is not about a literal belief in reincarnation, but about a philosophical and psychological challenge. It urges us to live in a way that we would be willing to repeat our lives over and over again. It confronts us with the question of whether we are living authentically and making choices that we can embrace wholeheartedly. This story teaches us about the importance of living in the present, of making choices that are true to our values, and of embracing our lives fully with all their imperfections. It reminds us that the value of life is not in its duration, but in its depth and intensity. By asking us to imagine the eternal recurrence of our lives, Nietzsche challenges us to live with passion, purpose, and an unwavering commitment to our own path. Bub 6. Pascal's Wager. Blaise Pascal, the French mathematician, physicist, and philosopher, was deeply concerned with the question of faith and belief in God. In his Pensées, he presented a pragmatic argument known as Pascal's Wager. He suggested that when it comes to the existence of God, we are faced with a bet. Either God exists or he does not. Pascal argued that if we bet on God's existence and live our lives accordingly, we stand to gain infinite happiness if we are correct, as we would be granted eternal life in heaven. If we are wrong and God does not exist, we lose nothing, as we simply return to the void. On the other hand, if we bet against God's existence and live as if he does not exist, we risk losing everything if we are wrong, as we would face eternal damnation. If we are right and God does not exist, we gain nothing of consequence. Pascal's Wager is not about proving God's existence, but about the practical considerations of belief. It suggests that when faced with uncertainty, it is more rational to live as if God exists, given the potential eternal consequences. Pascal wasn't advocating blind faith. Rather, he was appealing to reason and self-interest, arguing that the potential gains of believing in God far outweigh the risks of disbelief. Pascal's Wager has been debated extensively, with critics arguing that belief in God should not be based on a calculated bet, but on genuine faith. However, the story invites listeners to reflect on their own beliefs and the choices they make in the face of uncertainty. It challenges us to consider the consequences of our actions and the principles by which we live our lives. This story serves as a reminder that some decisions in life carry profound implications, and even when we cannot know the outcomes with certainty, the way we choose to live can have significant consequences. It encourages us to think deeply about what we believe, why we believe it, and how those beliefs shape our actions. 7. Diogenes and the Barrel. Diogenes of Sinope was a philosopher who lived in a large ceramic jar or barrel in Athens, rejecting the comforts of society to embrace a life of ascetic simplicity. He believed that virtue was better revealed in action than in theory, and that one should live in accordance with nature without the trappings of materialism. One day, Alexander the Great came to visit Diogenes. The powerful king, having heard of Diogenes' wisdom, was curious about the philosopher who lived with so little. As Alexander approached, he stood before Diogenes, who was basking in the sunlight. Alexander, impressed by the philosopher's indifference to wealth and power, offered to grant him any wish he desired. Diogenes looked up at Alexander and replied, "Yes, stand out of my sunlight." The reply shocked those around him, as they expected him to request something grand. Yet, for Diogenes, who valued the simplicity of life and the natural pleasures it brought, even the shadow of a king was an unnecessary intrusion. This story of Diogenes and Alexander highlights the philosopher's disdain for material wealth and social status. It teaches us that true happiness and contentment do not come from power, wealth, or external possessions, but from embracing simplicity and living in harmony with nature. Diogenes' response to Alexander serves as a powerful reminder that we often overlook the simple joys in life, while chasing after things that ultimately do not bring us lasting fulfillment. 8. Protagoras and relativism. Protagoras was a pre-Socratic Greek philosopher, known for his famous dictum, "Man is the measure of all things." This statement reflects his belief in relativism, the idea that truth and morality are not absolute, but vary depending on the individual or society. One day, a student approached Protagoras with a question. "Is it possible," he asked, "to say that something is definitively true or false?" Protagoras responded by sharing a parable. Imagine two people standing at the edge of a river. One sees the water as warm, while the other feels it as cold. Who is right? The student pondered this for a moment and then replied, "Perhaps they are both right in their own way." Protagoras nodded and said, "Exactly. Truth is relative to the individual's perception and experience. What is true for one may not be true for another, and that does not make either perspective invalid." Protagoras' story challenges the notion of absolute truth and invites us to consider that different viewpoints can each have their own validity. It reminds us that reality is often shaped by our perceptions, experiences, and cultural backgrounds. This perspective encourages us to be open-minded and to respect the diversity of opinions and beliefs that exist in the world. By acknowledging the relativity of truth, we can better understand and appreciate the complexity of human experience. Number 9. Francis Bacon and Empiricism. Francis Bacon was an English philosopher and scientist who is often credited with developing the scientific method. He believed that knowledge is derived from experience and that we must use observation and experimentation to understand the world. To illustrate the importance of empirical evidence, Bacon shared a story about a fisherman. The fisherman, through years of experience, had learned that the best way to keep his catch fresh was to immediately place the fish in a bucket of water. His observation was simple. Fish could not survive out of water for long. This knowledge, gained through direct experience, guided his actions and helped him preserve the quality of his catch. Bacon used this story to emphasize that our understanding of the world should be based on careful observation and experimentation rather than on abstract theories or assumptions. He argued that true knowledge comes from engaging with the world around us, testing our ideas, and learning from the outcomes. This story teaches us the value of empirical evidence and the scientific approach to understanding reality. It reminds us that knowledge is not something we can simply assume or accept without question. It is something we must actively seek through observation, experimentation, and experience. Bacon's philosophy encourages us to be curious, to question our assumptions, and to seek truth through direct engagement with the world. 10. Kafka and the Gatekeeper of the Law. Franz Kafka's parable, Before the Law, tells the story of a man from the countryside who seeks access to the law. He arrives at a great gate, guarded by a gatekeeper, and asks for permission to enter. The gatekeeper informs him that he cannot grant him entry at that moment. The man waits patiently, hoping for a chance to be allowed in. Years pass, and the man grows old waiting by the gate. He repeatedly asks the gatekeeper if he can enter, but each time, the gatekeeper tells him that it is not possible yet. The man bribes the gatekeeper with everything he has, but it is all in vain. He spends his life waiting for a permission that never comes, growing frail and weak. Finally, as he lies on his deathbed, he asks the gatekeeper, "Why is it that in all these years, no one else has come seeking entry into the law?" The gatekeeper replies, "No one else could enter here, because this gate was made solely for you. Now I am going to close it." The man dies, never having gained access to the law that he sought his entire life. Kafka's parable is a powerful allegory about the human condition, the nature of power, and the often futile struggle against the impenetrable structures that govern our lives. The man's endless waiting and his passive acceptance of the gatekeeper's authority reflect the ways in which individuals can become paralyzed by the systems and institutions that surround them. This story invites us to question the barriers we encounter in our own lives, whether they are societal norms, bureaucratic systems, or our own self-imposed limitations. It challenges us to consider whether we are like the man from the countryside, waiting for permission that may never come, or if we have the courage to challenge the gatekeepers that stand in our way. Each of these stories is rich with philosophical insight and offers a lesson that is relevant to our daily lives. They encourage us to think critically, to question the world around us, and to seek our own path to understanding and truth.